In 2025, American families are paying an extra $1,800 per year on average just to buy the same goods they purchased last year. If you've noticed your grocery bills climbing, your car becoming unaffordable, or your clothes costing significantly more, you're not imagining it. The culprit? The most aggressive tariff policy the United States has implemented in 90 years. Today, we're breaking down exactly how these tariffs work, who's winning, who's losing, and what this means for your financial future. By the end of this video, you'll understand why your paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it used to and what economic forces are really at play behind the political rhetoric. Let's start with the basics. In January 2025, the United States had an effective tariff rate of just 2.4% on imported goods. This was relatively low by historical standards and reflected decades of trade liberalization. The economy was performing reasonably well, with GDP growth at 2.8%, unemployment around 4%, and inflation gradually declining toward the Federal Reserve's target. Then came the tariff wave. Between January and October 2025, the effective tariff rate skyrocketed to approximately 18%, the highest level since 1934 during the depths of the Great Depression. These weren't small adjustments. They represented a fundamental shift in American trade policy, affecting hundreds of billions of dollars worth of imports from major trading partners including China, Canada, Mexico, and the European Union. The tariffs hit virtually everything. Steel and aluminum faced heavy duties. Automobiles and auto parts saw massive increases. Consumer goods from clothing to electronics became subject to substantial border taxes. Even food imports, which many Americans rely on year-round, faced new costs. The stated goal was to protect American manufacturing and bring jobs back home. The question is whether that actually happened. Here's where this gets personal. Tariffs aren't paid by foreign countries, despite what political rhetoric might suggest. They're taxes paid by American importers, who then pass those costs directly to you, the consumer. The data shows that by August 2025, consumer prices had risen by approximately 1.3% solely due to tariffs. And this is only about 1/3 of the total expected impact, as these costs continue working through the system. Let's look at specific categories. If you bought a new car in 2025, you paid roughly $4,500 more than you would have without tariffs, representing a 9% increase in motor vehicle prices. Shopping for clothes? Apparel prices jumped 28%. Leather goods rose 29%. Even food prices, which affect every household regardless of income, increased 2% in the short run and are expected to remain nearly 2% higher permanently. For the average American household, this amounts to losing $1,800 per year in purchasing power. But the burden isn't distributed equally. Lower-income households, which spend a larger fraction of their income on basic goods, lose about $1,000 annually, representing a much larger percentage of their total income. This makes tariffs what economists call a regressive tax, one that hits the poorest Americans hardest while wealthier households can more easily absorb the increased costs. Think about what $1,800 means to your family. That's a mortgage payment for many Americans. It's childcare for a month. It's your entire grocery budget for 2 months. That purchasing power simply vanished due to policy choices. The promise was that tariffs would bring manufacturing jobs back to America and strengthen employment. What actually happened tells a more complicated story. The unemployment rate has risen from around 4% before the tariffs to 4.3% by August 2025, the highest level since October 2021. Economic models project that by the end of 2025, payroll employment will be approximately 490,000 jobs lower than it would have been without the tariffs. Even more concerning is what's happening beneath those headline numbers. Long-term unemployment, which measures people who've been out of work for at least 6 months, has jumped to 25.7% of all unemployed people, an increase of over 4 percentage points in just 1 year. Nearly 2 million Americans now fall into this category, representing the highest level since the pandemic and nearly double the figure from early 2023. The pain isn't distributed evenly across the country. States with heavy exposure to international trade, particularly with Canada, China, and Mexico, have been hit hardest. California faces unemployment of 5.5%. Nevada sits at 5.3%. Michigan, heartland of American manufacturing that was supposed to benefit from protection, stands at 5.2%. Meanwhile, states less connected to international supply chains, like South Dakota, maintain unemployment rates below 2%. The cruel irony is that industries dependent on imported components, from construction to advanced manufacturing, have actually shed jobs as their costs increased and competitiveness declined. The modest gains in protected industries have been overwhelmed by losses elsewhere in the economy. So who actually benefits from this policy? The winners are relatively few and concentrated. Some segments of the manufacturing sector have seen gains, with long-run output projected to expand by about 2.5%. Industries producing steel, aluminum, and basic manufactured goods competing directly with imports have experienced increased domestic production. The federal government has also collected substantial revenue, raising $195 billion in customs duties in fiscal year 2025, more than 250% of what it collected the previous year. But the loser column is much longer and affects far more Americans. Advanced manufacturing, the high-tech, high-wage segment of manufacturing that America needs to compete globally, has actually contracted by 3.3% as these firms face higher costs for imported components and reduced export competitiveness. Construction has been devastated, contracting nearly 4% due to higher costs for steel, aluminum, and lumber. Agriculture has declined as American farmers face both higher input costs and retaliatory tariffs from trading partners who are closing their markets to American farm products. Overall, economic growth has taken a significant hit. Real GDP growth has been reduced by 0.5 percentage point, declining from 2.8% in 2024 to a projected 1.6% in 2025. This might sound abstract, but it means the entire economy is producing less, creating fewer opportunities and generating lower incomes than it would have otherwise. In the long run, the economy is expected to remain permanently smaller by approximately $105 billion annually, equivalent to losing the entire economic output of a mid-sized state. Perhaps most striking is what happened to trade itself. U.S. exports are projected to be 15% lower in the long run as other countries retaliate and American products become less competitive globally. We've essentially initiated a trade war where everyone loses, but American consumers, workers, and businesses bear the largest burden. The ripple effects extend into housing markets, one of the most important components of household wealth for most Americans. Mortgage delinquency rates have climbed from historic lows to 3.93% for residential properties, with 30-day delinquencies reaching 3.68% in the second quarter of 2025, exceeding pre-pandemic levels. Foreclosure filings have risen for 6 straight months, up 18% compared to the same period in 2024, putting the country on track to significantly exceed last year's foreclosure total. Now, tariffs aren't the only factor driving these trends. Property insurance has surged nearly 70% over 5 years. Property taxes and interest rates remain elevated. But tariffs contribute meaningfully to this stress by reducing household purchasing power and increasing the cost of living. When families are spending an extra $1,800 per year on basic goods due to tariffs, combined with higher housing costs, something has to give. For many households, especially those at lower income levels who were already stretched thin, the combination of tariff-induced price increases, elevated housing costs, and softer labor market conditions has created genuine financial distress. While we're not experiencing anything close to the foreclosure crisis of 2008, the upward trend in delinquencies signals that more American families are struggling to make ends meet directly as a result of policy choices. Adding to all of this economic disruption is significant legal and policy uncertainty. The Court for International Trade has ruled that many of the tariffs imposed under emergency economic powers are actually unlawful. If the Supreme Court upholds these lower court rulings, approximately $90 billion of the $195 billion in tariffs collected might need to be refunded, and future monthly revenue collection could fall by more than half. This uncertainty is perhaps as damaging as the tariffs themselves. Businesses cannot plan investments when they don't know what trade policy will look like 6 months from now. Manufacturers don't know whether to build new facilities or wait. Retailers struggle with inventory decisions. Workers face unclear job prospects. This paralysis itself dampens economic activity and growth. The fundamental question remains whether this approach achieves its stated goals. The evidence so far suggests that modest gains in specific manufacturing sectors come at the expense of much larger losses across construction, agriculture, services, consumer welfare, and overall economic growth. The comprehensive evidence tells a clear story. The 2025 tariffs have produced net negative effects on the American economy. GDP growth has slowed significantly. Unemployment has risen, with particularly concerning increases in long-term joblessness. Consumer prices have jumped, with lower-income Americans bearing the heaviest burden. Housing stress has increased, and the permanent long-term economic cost represents a reduction in American living standards that will persist unless policies change. This isn't about politics or ideology. It's about mathematics and evidence. When you tax imports heavily, costs rise, economic efficiency declines, trading partners retaliate, and the overall economic pie shrinks. The $1,800 your household lost isn't going to American workers or manufacturers in any meaningful aggregate sense. It's simply evaporating through economic inefficiency. Understanding these connections empowers you to make informed decisions and evaluate policy claims critically. If this analysis helped clarify what's really happening to the economy and your wallet, please like this video, subscribe for more evidence-based economic analysis, and share this with anyone who's confused about why everything suddenly costs more. The data is clear. The question is whether policy will follow the evidence or continue down a path that makes most Americans economically worse off. Thanks for watching.